Okay, so welcome everyone to this session from Dublin Food Co-op, working together collaboratively. I'm going to be doing a number of things tonight. We'll give it 1 hour, so we've started late, so we'll finish a little late. I'm looking to introduce the context of working together as I see it, the principles of co-ops, and then I want to get into a little on working in the virtual space, and then introduce sociocracy or dynamic governance, specifically with a short introduction to consent decision making. So hopefully that's okay, and I will just share my screen and we can, sorry, I'll just, now we can share these slides, so you don't have to consider taking notes, but it's good to take notes anyway. If you want to ask me questions anytime, just stick your hand up. So my name's Davie Philip. I was a CB member 20 years ago in Dublin Food Co-op, and I'm now based in Cloughjordan, which was a project that actually started out in Dublin Food Co-op. So I've been asked to do this session as part of the capacity building training that Dublin Food Co-op have support from Rethink Ireland to do. And I am going to try and do quite a bit tonight. So hopefully it's not too much. We can ask for clarity, but it's really, I'm just signposting an introduction to some of the principles of working together collaboratively. I always start with context, because without context, what's the point? Or an idea is not going to stick if it's out of context. So let's just take the context that we're in just now. We have a climate emergency, an ecological emergency, a very unequal world, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, or just maybe hopefully coming out of it. And I think for me, that context, which we can see here, it's the only graph I've got, so don't panic. I just wanted to introduce it, this idea of regenerative economics, because I think this is where we come together to work collaboratively or cooperatively. So this is Kate Raworth's work on donut economics. It's a strange term, but basically it means that we have to, this green donut is the safe space for humans or for our planet. And we need to keep below the ecological ceiling. So the big red areas are the areas that we're crossing thresholds in: climate change, biodiversity loss, land conversion. We're very aware of this. We're in overshoot in many of these areas, but we also need to create a social foundation, especially around the social equality, gender equality, housing, energy, water. And so this is something we've got a shortfall in that we need to build up. This safe operating space is what we're focused on. And if you want to look more, just search for Kate Raworth. But I want to just, in this context, we're looking at working together collaboratively. And for me, that's all about building community. And as Margaret Wheatley, the sort of systems thinker, social scientist, says, whatever the problem, community is the answer. And if we're going to work together as communities, we need to collaborate. And we've got a rich tradition of cooperatives in this country. This is Horace Plunkett. And he, over 100 years ago, would have been helping local communities meet their needs and solve their challenges by coming together, setting up markets, setting up creameries. And I think most of what we're looking at now needs more competency and capacity in being good cooperators, to have the capacity to cooperate. So the principles of co-ops, many of you will know, being cooperators, are, well, based on the values of self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. But every cooperative has these 7 principles. Open and voluntary membership, where we don't discriminate or exclude people. We are democratic and members controlled, so we're run by, or the members decide how it's run. economic participation, that members invest their time in a co-op in some way, and that the members benefit, not just shareholders or anonymous shareholders. All cooperators are shareholders in their co-op. We work with the principle of autonomy and independence, and that means that we have member contribution and that we work in a way that gives us that autonomy, and I'm going to go much more into this. Principle 5 is education, training and information, that we should constantly be looking for opportunities, as we're doing tonight, to educate members or employees or the greater community. Principle 6, I think, is often missing, cooperatives cooperating amongst other cooperatives. So we could actually see ecosystems of cooperatives. One of the best examples of this is in the Basque Country in Spain with Mondragon, which is a whole region of federated co-ops where they can share a university, a bank, and other services. And then the last principle, and this is concern for community. We're community-minded, and we're building stronger communities. So these are the principles of cooperation. What we're looking at tonight, really, though, is how do we work cooperatively, and especially in this new reality of virtual space. And I think the virtual space is really interesting because many of us now won't want to go back completely to the way that we were working, educating, facilitating. I know that for me, the virtual space has been very useful, especially to collaborate internationally. So I work across Europe now, where I can be in meetings every day, maybe twice a day with different European partners. So there's a lot of advantages, either for working locally, for working or engaging with colleagues more internationally. So we can be trans-local, we can be cosmo-local. We actually could have an opportunity to live and work more locally where we maybe less commuting. So there's a number of ways that we can communicate. We can't collaborate unless we can communicate. So these are just some of the tools I use every day now, and I just want to introduce them quickly. There's always free or open source versions, which sometimes can be as good as, so you can look these out. But the tools I use, as well as Zoom, so Zoom is the main one I'm using, but there's an open source equivalent called Jitsi. But I use Google Docs a lot, that shared documents, so I could be working in a Zoom call, but with my colleagues working on a Google document. And the Google documents and spreadsheets and forms allow us to just collaborate, I think, more. Slack, and this picture at the top of the left is one of my Slack channels. Along the very left-hand edge is all my different channels. So this is my channel for my Cloughjordan Community Farm. The second to the left line is all the different areas, spaces. So you might have a channel for the board, for coordination, for distribution, for education. And then you've got a stream with threads, so you can keep all of the communication on one topic together. Now, I find this a lot more effective than emails, especially if you're working in large groups or with a lot of stakeholders. Emails and following threads can be very difficult. So this is called Slack. It's a really good platform for messaging, communicating, but not for sharing documents. That would be what I use Google Docs for. The other tool you can see in the bottom of the right-hand side is one of my Miro boards. So I use Miro, which is a virtual whiteboard, along with Zoom when I'm working with groups. So this is a breakout room or board for my Communities for Climate Action training that we deliver. So it's got 4 spaces for 4 breakouts, and it's a collaborative whiteboard, really. You can put canvases up and you can work through little post-it notes, and everyone can be working on that as if they were working on a wall in a physical space. So these are 4 tools. There is so many tools and platforms available now. And my biggest tip is keep it simple. A lot of people might get onto Zoom, but might not have the digital capacity or literacy to use multiple platforms at the same time. So just be careful. You can do a lot in Zoom, especially with breakouts and using the chat. So just be careful of that. But I'm going to give you some tips on virtual facilitation, but just like normal facilitation. So my job, if you like, the thing that pays me is I facilitate meetings, and was a facilitator of physical meetings, and now I'm mostly a digital facilitator, facilitating digital meetings. And the word facilitate comes from the Greek facile, or the Latin facile, to make easy. So really, we're just making a meeting easy. We're helping to guide the group through a process, help everyone have a voice on that, make sure all voices are heard, and do a process to reach our objectives. So that's traditionally what we do, and now we need to be doing this in the virtual or remote setting. And so, like any facilitator anywhere, you know, we still, as digital facilitators, are designing our virtual meetings. We just need to ensure that we do that in a way that brings everyone on board and helps us move towards a common goal. Some of the benefits of digital facilitation, and I'm sure there's many more, I just put a few in to just share. It can involve large numbers of participants, so there's no limit in a sense. Now this is nice tonight, it's a small group, we can maybe get into conversations. When you're in a large meeting, like a few weeks ago with SOA, I facilitate a large meeting. I think there was for 350 people. So you don't have that opportunity to hear everyone's voice, or even we never use breakouts. So there's different ways that you might engage your audience depending on size. But one of the advantages is definitely you can do large events. For me, a lot less time driving to a meeting. So I might drive across the country for an hour-and-a-half meeting. I don't think I'm ever going to do that again. It just seems to be illogical. And there's potential a reduction of the environmental impact. Now, obviously, the digital space does take a lot of energy. I'm not saying that it's of no impact, but there's a lot less impact of us driving around, or worse, flying to Brussels for a 2-hour meeting, and the sort of things that a lot of people were doing before the pandemic. So hopefully we reduce some of the commuting time in our lives by blending our maybe work and education into the virtual space. And if well designed, I feel a meeting could be more effective. I mean, at the Ecovillage, we have monthly meetings with maybe 50 people. And when we were meeting together, things took a lot longer. I mean, you can never replace face-to-face. I'm not advocating for that. But I do think that a well-designed virtual meeting can be more effective, and it actually can be more rewarding, I think. So just consider these things. And here's some tips. These are basic tips. We're not going too much into detail in this short workshop tonight, but some methods that I use that I think anyone could, because we are all now holding meetings of some sort in this virtual space. So I think it's very good. The first thing I would make sure is make it very clear what the purpose of the meeting is, and send out the agenda beforehand. I would also restate that at the start of the meeting. So tonight or today, we're meeting for this purpose, and this is the way we're going to move through it. And I think that can just make people more comfortable. We know where we're going. We know there's going to be a breakout room and we're going to expect a speaker. We know there's going to be maybe a collaborative space, or we know there's going to be opportunities to speak, so we can relax. So I think that just be clear of the purpose and the flow or agenda of the meeting. I think it's important to be clear on how to ask questions. So where you either an H in the chat, or ask the questions in the chat, or in the bottom toolbar where I showed you the reactions, raise your hand. I think it's important for people to know how to do that. And I think it's important to design to be interactive. I mean, there's no point in coming to Zoom and getting a presentation that you could have just watched on YouTube. the opportunity here is to engage. And so if it's a long presentation, I would say to people, record that and we'll listen to it before the session, because the session I want to maximize my time with engaging with the group. And so that's something I do. I minimize presentations to like 10 minutes, unless the function of it is to be informed and there's an opportunity to ask questions, of course. But designed to be interactive, designed to be collaborative. I definitely use check-ins, and you saw there at the check-in, you need to be really clear with the invitation, because it's always difficult, I think, to keep people concise. So sometimes if it's a big group, I'll ask the group to check in on the chat, so who they are, where they're from, why they're here, but do it in the chat. Even that can build a sense of community. Often I'll give challenges to enter into the chat to keep people engaged and not just sitting back and consuming. And then the breakout room is really good to do, and you can break out in Zoom randomly or design the breakouts to 5 people, 10 people, 20 people. But from my experience in facilitating, a good conversation happens with about 5 people. 8 people is too much. You'll end up having in physical life 2 conversations. So 5 people I think is good for a breakout. And often if I feel the energy lagging, I might just let's do a quick breakout or a quick little triad, 3 people in a random room with a question. But also there's a reason I think it's good to do breakouts and not just keep everyone in the plenary, is that many people are more introverted, and it's difficult to find your voice in a large group. And it's a lot easier in a smaller group to speak up. So I like making sure that there's a mix between the plenary, maybe a presentation, maybe a pairs to start, and then a breakout room of around 5. I really like a breakout room about 5. Now you might need to assign some responsibilities. I normally wouldn't, in small groups, have a group host or a facilitator in each room. I would just give the sort of instructions that choose a rapporteur and someone to keep notes. And here's a very clear question. So it's very clear. We don't arrive in the room going, what are we doing? Why are we here? Or you could use a Miro board, which I showed earlier, or a Google document to have spaces for people to harvest or to bring the results, the feedback of that conversation out. Sometimes there's no point in having a conversation unless we're harvesting the conversation. So it's really good to capture what's coming out there, especially if we're working towards something or building something together, co-creating. It's important we capture those conversations, at least the insights, not every word. So I would always ask maybe someone that's going to feed back, or maybe even just at the end of the session to ask them to put their key insights into the chat. So it's there, it's recorded. The other way you can maybe ask questions is using the poll function. So Zoom has a poll function, which is quite good to gather data or gather where people are at. But also Mentimeter, or there's quite a few little apps you can get now where you can ask a question and it turns it into a word cloud or a visual or a pie chart. So there can be some great ways of getting information from your audience and feeding it back in a way that just gives a sense. And it can be done quite quickly. You give a little code in the chat for the Mentimeter. You go straight there. So you have to either open another window or use another device, but it can work really well. So these are just some facilitation methods that I use that I like. Introduce maybe a new approach, although you'll find out it's not that new, but called dynamic governance or sociocracy. So that's what I want to do next. I'm going to share my screen again. So sociocracy, or in America, they call it dynamic governance. I quite like dynamic governance. I think our movements are full of jargon words that don't make much sense. permaculture. I teach permaculture, but I'm always, the word is just a bit nonsense. Or I have a friend that does dragon dreaming, a really good project management and way to manage groups of people. But what a terrible name. So sociocracy, I mean, you'll hear now why it's called sociocracy, but I sometimes will say it's dynamic governance, especially if I'm talking to a local authority or someone that's not from our grassroots community groups type environment. So sociocracy is, I suppose, a way to structure our organizations and to make decisions that's really easy for a co-op because it's based on similar principles. A co-op or a not-for-profit social enterprise to start using. It means governance by peers, sociocracy, and it's really an increasingly effective way of working for communities, especially if you've been working with consensus. So I know in Dublin Food Co-op, you work with consensus. Here in the Ecovillage, we work with consensus. And probably when you hear that word, you probably take in a breath of air because it is frustrating sometimes how long consensus can take. So in sociocracy, we use consent decision-making. I'm going to introduce that, which is, I think, a lot more agile. So sociocracy, I think, was first properly coined, although it goes further back. I'll show you in the next slide. But Jared Endenberg was a Dutch electrical engineer. He was a Quaker, and his family business was Endenberg Electronic. And he was looking for ways that the organization could function more effectively, more dynamically, more harmoniously. And he was interested in moving away from a command and control hierarchy into much more self-organizing circles that had autonomy, that would be more meaningful environment to work in. And he felt that it would be more, it would have a positive impact on the workers. And so he called it the sociocratic circle method. And that'll come up as I go deeper into this presentation. But in recent times, and I just want to highlight it, Sociocracy 3.0 is a few years old, and its difference is instead of doing a whole organizational implementation, changing your governance structures and systems to sociocracy or dynamic governance, with Sociocracy 3.0, they have about 40 patterns. So they have a pattern for decision-making, a pattern, which is a set of instructions for role selection. And so you can use and adapt as needed. And I really like this version because I know in the Ecovillage, we tried to introduce a whole system change and it gets resisted. So just start to introduce some of the pieces and to work more sociocratically, if you like. So here's a little graph of where it came from. So even the word Auguste Comte, sort of the inventor or the coin of the term sociocracy, that's where the term comes from. Later with Lester Frank Ward, with democracy, so mixing those two. But really, we get down to what we see as sociocracy in this time, started with the Quakers, and then with Jared Endenberg in the 70s, then to, there's different versions, holocracy, some of you might have heard. It's a much more proprietary paid-for system developed by Brian Robertson, who's from the Silicon Valley sort of people. I don't like it because it's because you have to pay for it. I mean, I like the open source and that people can take something. So I like the sociocratic circle method and I like Sociocracy 3.0. But there's a lot of tools, videos out there if you're interested after this introduction to go a bit further. So why use sociocracy? Well, I think, again, for cooperatives, it matches our principles. It's really about valuing shared power and distributing power and having equality across our organization. It helps us especially in structure, but also in decision making. And so it brings, I feel, it brings more clarity. It's calmer meetings because people have a number of processes, the main one being rounds. who use rounds, so everyone gets to speak, and this consent process. I think it connects teams. It sort of busts silos, if you like, which you see in most organizations, deeper and deeper silos. It brings some cohesion, I think, together, and synergy between different departments or different areas of work. Okay, so there's the why sociocracy. This is the principles. There's two main ones: effectiveness and equivalence. I'll talk a bit more about, but empiricism and consent and transparency, accountability, continuous improvement. The effectiveness and equivalence are the two main ones. So it's about the organization being able to realize its aims more effectively and efficiently. And it's about equivalence, that there's equality between all our members and honouring everyone's voice. No one's silenced, no one's ignored, no one holds real power over. It's power with. And in sociocracy, there's safe, protected time for everyone to speak, have their voices, and deciding where you want to put your energy to. And I'll show you that when we start thinking about the circles. Okay, so there's our fundamental principles, similar to co-ops, effectiveness and equivalence, but valuing everything that a co-op and a cooperation values. So there's three features that I'm going to mention tonight. There's really more, but circles. And in some ways, the governance structure of an organization that's thinking more dynamic governance or sociocratic looks like the bottom right-hand corner. It's a series of interlocking circles rather than the diagram on the left-hand side, which is a hierarchy with the CEO at the top, the department leads, and then all the way down to the workers and doers at the bottom. Without voice, without having that autonomy, and often without cohesion between the departments. So that feedback for me is the principle that all our activities and all our roles are transparent, and there's ways to have more connection, cohesion. So the circles are really your working groups or your organizational units. We call them domains. So they're domains of activity. So you could imagine, I can't point to this, but if you look at the diagram of the circles, now don't worry about this, some people find this hard to get, but the three main circles around the middle circle are domains. And in each domain, like say in the Ecovillage, I work in the domain of education and research. We might have subdomains. So we have our tours, we have our group visits, they're subdomains, but they're in the domain of education. The circle in the middle we call coordination is where each domain is represented and we ensure synergy and cohesion. And the board of directors usually connects to that inner circle, that coordination circle, rather than sitting above everyone. So I mean, I don't want to go into this too much, but sometimes in dynamic governance or sociocracy, they talk about hierarchy or an ecology of circles. So there's still hierarchy. A lot of our lefty, greeny local movements are against hierarchy. There is hierarchy in nature. What we need to protect ourselves from is command and control, power over hierarchy, and see that there is a sense of hierarchy even in these circles that's much healthier, that facilitates more self-organization, autonomy, and cohesion, rather than the traditional organizational diagram, which can be useful. I'm not saying we should all switch to this right away, but I think there's a much healthier environment, a lot more meaning and purpose in an environment that's structured in these interlocking circles. And for me, the unit of transformation is the small group. So it allows people to work in circles with autonomy, but with very clear mandates, and the higher circles, that's why there's a hierarchy, has oversight over those other circles. So there's always good governance in a sense. The other piece is consent decision-making, which I'm going to go into in a bit more detail, but just to capture the sort of essence of sociocracy or dynamic governance, these are the sort of features. Circles and working in rounds, having autonomous circles and probably even subdomains or subcircles, and also higher circles for cohesion and oversight. Feedback, so ensuring that there's good feedback, we're busting silos, and there's good cohesion, and using this consent decision-making process. So there's 4 dimensions. I'm going to pause after this again, we can get into it. So what especially Sociocracy 3.0 brings in the sort of agile approach. So to be able to respond quickly and effectively to the different contexts or situations. So clarifying our domains and getting into the sort of flow between those domains. That's our linking the domains. So I'm not wanting to complicate things, but they have a double linking system. So someone from a lower circle is represented in the higher circle, and the higher circle is represented in the lower circle. Don't worry about that too much, but that double linking is quite important. So we have a structure then that's a set of interlocking circles or domains. Okay, and then participation. This can really focus our interaction. What I love about this type of system, I can operate in a few different places, knowing the responsibilities and remit I might have in different places. I can contribute then in different ways, not in one role and stuck in that role. We can really build collaboration, and as an organization and as an individual, I can learn and grow. I really like that. In the doing dimension, we can identify and distribute work into the proper domains and make sure there's good synergy between those domains. There's some nice tools for backlogs and prioritization and stacking, using Kanbans and these sort of other tools that just help us now move issue from the setting up and finishing. And there's always improvement. And then in the agreeing, which is what we're going to look at now, we can really tap in to the wisdom of the full group. Everyone's got a voice, everyone can co-create, we can make decisions, we can experiment, we can make sure that the decisions that we're making are good enough or safe enough to try. So these are 4 dimensions of the sociocratic approach. So the circle, again, is just this autonomous, self-organizing, self-governing group. It's self-governing, but it's part of the full system. So it collaborates within the organization, and circles can happen for a certain purpose, or they can be established for permanently. They're the building block of the organization. It's where we gather around a driver, which is a need for that domain, and we make our agreements by consent. So that's autonomous, self-organizing, self-governing. And I think this is why sociocracy or dynamic governance really resonates with, I think, the sort of grassroots, the bottom-up, the cooperative, the community-led groups, because we don't want to be told what to do. We want that autonomy. We want to be able to self-organize, and we want to find meaning in the work and the collaborations that we're involved in. Make decisions without being that sort of majority vote or even consensus. So when consensus means we all agree or we all have the same opinion, consent means no one has an objection. So it's very similar. They both came from the Quakers, but there's quite a big distinction. For me, the process of consensus is long and engages everyone, and consent can be long as well, but it's usually quite short, and it's a facilitated process that's just trying to find objections. We say objections are gifts because then we can adapt our proposal with more information. So let me run through it. Consent decision-making is a facilitated decision-making process. It deliberately harvests these objections to integrate the wisdom that they contain or into the agreement or the proposals being made. It helps this balance of equivalence and effectiveness. I know from a long time now how ineffective consensus can be. It can just cripple us. We've got decisions at the Ecovillage that we've been trying to get them passed for 3 years. You know, we need to have other ways of working. And I think this one, consent decision making, really works. It's more effective for me. This is done in rounds. So the facilitator, and I'll explain what the rounds are. We may have 3 or 4 rounds to come to the decision. The consent decision-making process starts with a proposal, actually starts with a driver. So we identify a driver for the proposal. A driver is just what's wrong, what do we sort of need? And from that, we create a proposal. What Kevin shared in the chat there, the Lumio, is a digital platform that facilitates us doing that, not face-to-face. So we can have a conversation. We have a conversation until a proposal is formed. And then we go through this process. So we need a proposal. So once we've got a proposal, the facilitator can work in rounds to reach consent. That's what we're doing. When we're seeking consent, we're looking for a decision that's good enough and safe enough to go ahead. So the other thing that we have to be, this is similar to consensus, is aware of a range of tolerance. You know, because if you hold on to your preference too strongly, we're never going to get anywhere. Okay, so our range of tolerance, if you look at this bell curve, in the middle there would be your preference. That's what you want. And at both edges, there's what you cannot tolerate, but there's a sort of space there that as we work together to co-create this proposal or to agree on this proposal, we just need to be aware of that range of tolerance. And then if we can work with a range of tolerance, I think actually, if we mindfully there, because I know in many organizations, there'll be people that just are so fixed on their preference, there's no way of swaying them. And I don't think it's good for collaboration and cooperation. So our range of tolerance is important. And when every circle, if we're making our consent decisions in our circle, has a description of what they do and what they need to do to achieve that aim. And again, that preferences, personal preferences, and what you're okay with, your range of tolerance is important to sort of help us move towards agreeing or making the decision. So here's the sequence for the rounds. So we present the proposal, and there's other ways in sociocracy to form the proposal. There's proposal forming patterns, if you like. And I do think a lot of us in our organizations are quite weak at proposal forming. So we're not coming with very clear proposals or worked out proposals. And I think there's a challenge we have. But once we have a proposal, we do a round of clarifying questions. And this is important. We hear the proposal and we don't jump in with, I don't like that. I don't think it's a good idea. The first round, everyone's heard any clarifying questions. And again, the skills in asking good clarifying questions needs a bit of practice. But when we get good at this, we can go quite quick. Then we do a brief response round. Well, how do you feel about it? You know, what do you think? And so again, we ask everyone to be brief, but everyone gets a chance to say something, how they feel, what they think. But we're all in that round with the same objection, our same purpose. We're just looking to share our initial response. Then we want to check where the objections are. And again, we say that objections are a gift because it brings in new insights. So we harvest the objections first. The objections aren't concerns. We're going to note all concerns, but concerns, you still want to go forward, but you just want your concerns noted. So, but we start with harvesting or checking for people with objections, and we hear them. So what are your objections? Can we integrate that into the proposal once we've heard that quickly? And there might be a few ways of resolving the objection. We ask the proposal owner, so the the person has made the proposal. Now you've heard that objection. Can you integrate that into your proposal? And we do the rounds again. Or you can ask the member with the objection, can you come up with an amended proposal? And we do this again. Or if it's quick, the facilitator might just go, there's the amendment, let's check again. This sometimes isn't enough, and maybe you need to take some time, and you might have a dialogue with people or a group discussion, or bring the proposer and the objector together and they come back after a break, similar to what we do in consensus. But the idea is that we move forward. Is it safe enough to try? Can we review this? And you always put a review date in, next month, in 6 months, in a year. So it usually allows people to, well, let's give it a go. It's safe enough to try. It's not going to impact our objective of this circle or this organization. And then it's important that we celebrate. And that's it, really. It's quite a simple process, using the rounds, a clear proposal, and having the rounds so we're all doing the same thing. We're sharing the questions that we have, we're sharing feelings or initial responses, and then we check for objections. And we do harvest the concerns. I do it sometimes in the virtual space with hand signals. So can we just check for consent? So yes, thumbs up, I'm good with this. I have a concern, I'm not blocking it, I'm not objecting, but I want my concern noted, that's that way. And then the objection is a raised hand, and it's a raised hand as it's a gift. And we're really, in this process, that's what we're looking for. Objections that are well thought out, they're rational, and that we can bring them in to make the proposal even stronger. So that's really the essence of this. There's more details, and I'll run through it quickly, but you can get these notes. I can share these with Kevin. So it's used to make and evolve agreements in the circle or in the whole organization, but it works best in the circle. These are mostly operational decisions. I think if we were looking at a policy decision, we might use consensus, or we might use a preferendum, which would be a range of options that we might select our preferences. And that's a really nice way. We've used it recently in one of my organizations for selecting the board. We did it in a preferendum. So there was 16 people wanting to join the board. We had 12 places, and we did it in preferendum. So objections stop the proposal becoming an agreement, but we want those. Withholding objections. So if you're sitting and if you've got an objection and you withhold it, that's actually damaging to the group, to the circle, and to the organization. You're sitting with information that could help shape a stronger proposal, and so you've got a responsibility to share that. Raising objections doesn't mean that proposals need to be good enough for now or safe enough to try. If raising an objection, you've got a good reason for, and every agreement has a review date. So it's not like you've set in stone something that can never be overturned. So an objection is a reason why what is proposed stands in the way of more effective satisfaction of the driver. So the driver, again, is just the term they use for what's motivating the proposal. What's the issue that this proposal is addressing? And again, we deliberately seek objections. So objections are gifts that reveal wisdom, reveal opportunities or impediments. They emerge through individuals and belong to the whole circle. And in sociocracy, we love objections. That's what they say anyway. But concerns aren't objections. A concern, if you've got a concern, doesn't stop proposal becoming an agreement. They as well often contain wisdom and might actually lead to a small adaptation of the proposal. And everything's recorded in the logbook, which is another thing dynamic governance and sociocratic organizations have, a logbook of decisions. The platform that Kevin mentioned in the chat, Lumio, actually does this logging all decisions. So if you've been using Lumio for years, you can go back through every decision made, see the conversation, see the proposal, see what people thought of it, and that it passed and when it passed. So that's a really good system. Okay, I've got some resources just to fire out there. You can just search sociocracy or dynamic governance. There is loads of YouTube ones, YouTube films. There's many on cooperatives using SOCIOCRACY, or I'm involved in co-housing as Porrig is. So there's many co-housing organizations are using this sort of circle way of organizing and consent decision making. So there's loads and loads of resources out there for you to find. Sociocracy30.org is the Sociocracy 3.0, which is one of my favorites, just because, as I said earlier, it's not a whole system implementation. It's about 46 patterns, and they're building more patterns, little recipes for how to make a proposal, how to select a role, how to make a decision. So it's you just bring them in and adapt or use them as needed. And I really like that. It's not as demanding, especially there'll be a lot of resistance to changing processes or governance structures or ways of making decisions. So that was our last piece.